We're here to talk about the HAI ASAP program. So I'm here, joining me here is some representatives from the Air Charter Safety Foundation. Brian, would you like to introduce your team?
Sure, thank you. Well, thank you, Chris, first of all, for inviting us to have this session. I'm Brian Burns. I'm the president of the Air Charter Safety Foundation. This is Frank Raymond. Frank is our director of safety, and Bob Roofley is the chairman of the Air Charter Safety Foundation. So we just wanted to take a few minutes and kind of explain what the Aviation Safety Action Program is all about. If you guys are familiar with that term, the acronym being ASAP. But ASAP basically is a voluntary safety reporting platform with immunity from the FAA. So what we have worked very hard in the last 10 years or so with the fixed wing folks, both in Part 135 and Part 91, to get them on board. So today we have over 200 companies that we, the Air Charter Safety Foundation, are third-party program managers for that program. So this is a totally turnkey process where we set up the memorandum of understanding. We work with you guys with your event review committee. But the point is that when we first started this program with the fixed wing, there was a lot of hesitation because this is a true partnership with the FAA. And a lot of folks, as you may know, don't have a lot of trust that this is a full disclosure, transparency, the relationship with the FAA that we've already worked with about 55 FSDOs in the nation. I think there's like 75 or so. So we've got those relationships already established with these 200 companies that we work with. But the point is that what we're trying to introduce here today is trust us and trust the FAA. They support it, they get it, they understand it, and it's all about enhancement and improvement of your operation. And one of the things we emphasize the most is that a lot of the reports we receive would have never, ever been disclosed or discovered unless you were enrolled in the ASAP program. Because that immunity is important, obviously, and that protection is why people are reporting safety issues that necessarily would go undiscovered or undisclosed, right? So with that said, I'll turn it over to Frank. Frank is our safety, our director of safety. He is the ASAP program manager. He's seen over 1,000 reports come in this past year that he's been with us. So he can kind of give you a little bit of background on just the process of what it takes to enroll in the ASAP program. Frank.
Thanks, Brian. So, oh wow, that's really loud. Goodness. So thank you for having us. I am the ASAP for ACSF, and like I said, we've got 1,400 last year, over 200 members, so we're getting quite a few reports. Over 95% of those are what we call sole source events, meaning that we wouldn't have known about the event if it wasn't for the ASAP reporting program. So very, very powerful tool to get a window into your operation. So big proponent of the program. I started ASAP programs for Part 121 many years ago and have come home to ACSF in the last year. And it's been really great to see. And to Brian's point, I think the trust is the big piece. And that's trust within the ERC. It's trust with myself. You know, an operator can call me up with a question and they know that they have that freedom to speak freely. And we can have a very open discussion about the event, what we want to do with it, what issues may come out of it. And then that way when we go into the ERC meeting, the event review committee meeting, we already kind of have a game plan of what we're trying to accomplish. So very important to build that trust early because without it, it becomes a very difficult process to manage. So.
Well, that's a good start. So, Bob, you're with an operator, and you are on the board for the ACSF. So as an operator, what's something you could share with the fellow operators that can demonstrate the value of a program like this?
Sure. So yeah, as Chris mentioned, I'm actually chairman of the board right now, but that's a voluntary position, so I'm only here for a while. I'm actually a vice president director of operations for Pentastar Aviation out of Pontiac, Michigan. And you know, the ASAP program is really, again, it's about getting information that you probably wouldn't have known, and because your flight crews are a little cautious, unsure whether to report it or whether not to. And this really just opens up the opportunity to get that information on the table and do something about it, right? It's about getting it into your SMS program, about evaluating it and fixing the problems. You know, I like to tell my pilots that, you know, you never make a mistake. You make a decision based on the information you're given, the training you have, the experience you have, and the amount of time you have to make that decision. All we want to do is understand, as we all know, hindsight is 20/20. So if we can look back at that decision that you made and find a way to give you more information or train you better so that you're better prepared or give you more time, whatever those aspects are, that's what ASAP is about. Tell us your challenges that you encounter. And the other important part that Frank kind of skipped over a little bit with the ERC, the Event Review Committee is made up of 3 individuals: the FAA, a management person who has to have the responsibility to spend money for the company, and basically an employee rep. ASAP works for pilots, mechanics, ground personnel, flight attendants, and actually they now have, the FAA's gotten really, really broader with their ASAP program, and they now have a category called Other. Just so if you have a interesting group of lift operators, or I'm not that familiar with helicopter terms, but if you have that, you can add them into it. And so you can begin to collect that information, but no action is ever taken until there's unanimous decision between those 3 individuals. And that's a key to it, right? So everybody has to agree. The FAA, the management, and the employee rep have to agree as to what action happens from that, what the corrective action is or whatever. So it's just really a good program in that it really brings out a lot of information that you really as a company aren't aware sometimes of what's going on out there. So,
Thanks, Bob. So, you know, a lot of people could be a little bit intimidated by this ASAP thing and working with the FAA right out the gate. But what about, you know, some companies are just haven't even established a reporting program at all. So it reminds me of when I would visit units and do some assessments, that sort of thing. You would talk to, say, a maintenance supervisor, and they would talk about an issue that they had fixed, and they were very proud of that issue. And it was on one location, and they had many different units across the country or whatever. And I said, hey, did you share that with the rest of the organization? And this is just one organization. And we found the problem and we fixed it in-house, you know, problem solved. It's like, do you think there's one other organization that just might be in the same set of circumstances with the same hazard that could left undetected could cause a problem, a big problem? And then they're like, scratch their head and like, that's a good point. So now this is just talking about one organization. So if you're not reporting already and sharing within your organization, that certainly is the first step. But then tell us a little bit about that process where somebody decides, okay, I'm reporting it internally, and then they discover this needs to be submitted externally to, say, help others, like in the ACSF program, and there's other programs that are out there. So any thoughts on that?
So, yeah, absolutely. You mentioned it, Chris, the ACSF database. So the way ASAP works is that data is yours. You keep it within your company. You do have to report the statistics of it to the FAA on a quarterly basis, but it's just how many events, kind of what categories, and some basic stuff. If you desire to share that information outside your organization, the FAA has what's called the ACSF program, Aviation Safety Information Data Sharing, something like that. Aviation Safety Sharing. I forget exactly the acronyms nowadays. But if you do that, then you get access to that national database so that you can begin to see. And the example that I like to give is that if you're, I'll try to think of more of a helicopter operation, you're going to operate into some heliport that maybe you haven't been to in a long time, you can go into the ACSF database and they will show you the events that have happened at that heliport. You know, maybe it's a tail strike or whatever it might have been, so that you can become more aware of what's going on at that airport. It's back to sharing that data with other operators. So that's really how the ACSF database works.
Gosh, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time with this mic. If I can give a better example, maybe from kind of an internal fix. So we had an operator who had a problem with their FMS system on a fixed wing operation. They went to the OEM that produced the avionics and found out there was a problem with the avionics itself. So the flight crew ran into this, had an altitude deviation as a result of an FMS problem, and they went back to the OEM. The OEM fixed that problem. So now everybody who's operating that same avionics got that update, and that fixed that problem for everybody. So while it didn't run through the ACSF program, which I'm a huge proponent of, that one event made a nationwide fix for all the operators using that FMS. So I thought that was a pretty amazing, and that just happened 2 weeks ago when I was on the phone call with that group. So pretty amazing that fix happened. So yeah, it's great.
So I'll just add one thing with Frank touched on, which is the Air Charter Safety Foundation has their own SMS platform as well. And we always say that ASAP complements SMS. And so if the folks that are talking about reporting and don't know where to start and, you know, how to even enroll in the not only SMS but ASAP, we have that turnkey already set up for you. So we can get you enrolled in SMS, get you tied into the ASAP program under one platform, right? And just to maybe finish the thought process there, our partnership with HAI has a very low cost to get involved in the program. We did a deal where we want to get folks enrolled. So we provided a proposal that basically gets you in based on just the number of participants, but depending on the size of the flight department and the number of participants, you can get into this under $1,000 a year for your operation, right? So there's even, for a small, you can start as little as $600 or so a year, and you're fully enrolled in SMS and the ASAP program. So there's some, that's for small operations, right? And then it's scaled up that I'll be happy to talk to anybody about if you're interested in participating on what those numbers look like. So,
Thanks, Bob. So, I'm sorry. Thanks, Brian. So, just so everybody knows, the Air Charter Safety Foundation, along with many other safety-focused entities, are in the rotor safety zone, just back behind us over there. And feel free to go talk to them and tell them your specific story and what you're looking for. No commitments, obviously, just get a better understanding of the program. So one thing I think I always like to do is recent examples. So can you share a very compelling story, perhaps, about a recent example where something was reported and something got corrected and a lot of people benefited from that? Anything come to mind? Maybe not recent, just a good story.
So I have the one that Russ talks about a lot. And again, we work a lot with fixed wing. So this is our just recent partnership with HAI is to help the rotor wing industry also. But we had an operator was transitioning up the East Coast with a fixed wing airplane, transitioned from one air traffic control center to the other. And when he got to the new center, the center said, "What are you doing at that altitude? You know, why are you there?" And the pilot's like, "I'm pretty sure this is where I was told to be, and this is, you know, everything's right." And the controller got a little upset with him, sent him to the right altitude. The pilot just said, "You know what, it just didn't feel right," so he filed an ASAP report. Wasn't even sure if he did anything wrong. He just filed the ASAP report. Well, a few days later, the ATC filed an ASAP report. It's not actually an ASAP, but they filed a violation on him. And what that then becomes what we call a non-sole source. So there's two entities that reported the event. So now we look at it, and when the ERC meets, they start talking about it, they investigate it. So the FAA guy contacted the Air Traffic Control Center, and they started doing some investigation. They found out that the Air Traffic Control Center was actually using an outdated chart. So it was all the Air Traffic Control Center's fault. The first guy was using a wrong chart. The two centers had not gotten. And they discovered, most of you know, publications are challenging to get out into your organization. Well, ATC has that problem too. So it was an opportunity to fix that problem so that now a potential, not even just another violation of a pilot, but an actual, air-to-air, mid-air or something potentially happens. So that's another great example. And just to go back a second on the ERCs, part of the reason ACSF is part of these programs is we sit in on the ERCs. We don't have a voting right, but we're there to mentor, to guide, and bring our experience. Frank sits in on over 40 event review committee meetings a month. So that experience alone, sitting in yours, to be able to say, hey, wait a minute, guys, we've seen this event before, here's how we handle it, or even keep that FAA inspector who he may only sit in on 1 or 2 ERCs a month, right? Or maybe not even that many. So,
Actually, add to that sometimes it's not the FAA that I have to corral, it's the operator. And so that's been very interesting to see that a lot of times the FAA rep that we're all afraid of is actually the best, quote, best party in that discussion because they've got the philosophy a little bit better, and sometimes I have to kind of pull the operator back a little bit and go, hold on, wait a minute, remember why we're here. So it's been very interesting to see how that works, so yeah.
Thanks. So there's lots of folks out here, consummate professionals, and they hear something about, immunity or, you get away with murder or whatever. All you got to do is land and submit an ASAP and you're golden. So the system's not designed to protect bad actors. So talk a little bit about that for those people to make sure the quality is not compromised.
So what we call it is the Big Five. So if you violate a regulation knowingly, if you have reckless conduct, so I always joke, if you fly underneath the Golden Gate Bridge inverted and then you file an ASAP report, we're going to violate the heck out of you, right? You knew what the rule was, you violated it intentionally, you intentionally violated safety of flight, you're not covered under the ASAP program. So ASAP is really designed for unintentional violations, unintentional acts. And so there is a checklist that we go through at each event that we review that we decide whether we're including or excluding a report. Now, having said that, I would say I've been with ACSF for just over a year now, probably looked at 1,000 different ASAP reports. I think we've excluded maybe 5 in that year, over 200 operators for one of the Big Five. So it's very rare that we exclude a report because, again, our purpose is to get the data. So if we exclude the data, that doesn't help us improve the system. So it is not an immunity program. There is immunity protections built in, but if you go out and do something intentionally, we're not gonna give you a pass on that.
Yeah, so it really is actually just not in the program. It's excluded. So there's also sometimes a report will come in and there's something that they decide it's kind of a nothing burger and it doesn't even need to get elevated to a committee level because we want to encourage people that every single report is not just going to be a drain on everybody's time. So there's a process to determine does it rise to the level of a committee consideration.
So typically our top 3 ASAP reports, and again, keep in mind we've got all the data for the fixed wing, so what I share with you guys is in that space versus helicopter. So we've got a handful of helicopter operators in this audience that are participating in ASAP, but they're very new to the program. So there's not a lot of data collected for those kind of reports. But if you look in the fixed wing, it's all about altitude deviation, route deviation, and TCAS deviations, right, that are typically what I would kind of refer to are benign. So back to Chris's point here is that when ASAP reports are filed, for small organizations that may be in this audience right now, if you guys file 3 to 5 ASAP reports a year, that may be a lot. you got to just put it in the volume. Now, Frank will tell you that we've got fleets of aircraft with over 7,500 aircraft in the fleet, and he's doing ASAP ERC meetings, once every month with those. For small operators, it's typically once every quarter. So for an hour, whatever you accumulate of ASAP reports, you'll review them, and a lot of those are really, okay, we'll watch the trend, we'll see if there's any pattern. In the corrective action may not be anything at that point, and it'll be just kind of rolled into, the next ERC meeting. So.
And part of why the FAA is doing this is they want that data. So to Chris's point, it may be benign for your organization, but if it's an altitude bust, simple thing, it was a mistake, you'd be surprised again how that data flows to the ACSF system, and they will begin to see things. They'll see the large trends in our operations and organizations.
The one thing I'd add to that is that we actually review every report. So whether it's a TCAS, whether it's an altitude deviation that is benign, as Brian calls it, we look at every single report. Because one, we have to agree as an ERC to accept the report into the program, and we have to agree on any corrective action. In a lot of cases, like Brian says, there is no corrective action, but occasionally you'll get one of those that looks benign, and everybody looks at it and says, wait a minute, what about this? There's one little piece, and I think that's the value to, Bob's point earlier of having three of us in the room, a company operator, a representative, a pilot representative, and an FAA representative, is we're all looking at it from a slightly different perspective. And so that one person may see one thing in that narrative that makes them ask the question that we would have missed if I looked at it and said, oh, it's just a TCAS, we don't need to review it. There may have been a nugget in there that I missed. And so having that group think to look at every report and decide, yes, we agree it's benign and we can close it, or maybe there is something that we need to dig a little further on. So.
Okay, good. So the one thing we're coming up on towards the end of the period, but the one thing just to remind is, it's a small investment. Lots of folks who are smaller operators simply don't have the resources, the time to dedicate active management to something like this. That is where you step in. You are their third-party active manager. You don't do everything for them, but you do the lion's share of the prep work, the coordination with FAA. There's a requirement to get an MOU together. Sometimes that can be a little tricky. They've got a relationship with all the FSDOs in the country, and they can find the right resources to get something done a lot faster than perhaps you would be able to, because you're focused on other things that are just as important for your operation.
So let me just expand on that, Chris. So when I said earlier, I used the term turnkey, right? So as a third-party program manager, we do all the administrative work on your behalf, and it's primarily about 95% of it we do. And so we're representing you in getting this process started, right? So the fact that we can set this whole memorandum of understanding up, which is really the agreement between you, us, and the FAA. We facilitate that whole process. Frank sets up all the ERC meetings with all parties involved. So there's a lot of time-consuming man hours that go into this behind the scenes. You guys primarily participate in the ERC meetings when those are established, and then we go from there.
Yeah, so that's why there is a cost. But if you take a look at that cost and compare it to even having a half-time employee, that might be between $30,000 to $70,000 a year for somebody just to be a simple management, keep the lights on. That's what you bring to the table. So, before we close up, are there any questions from the audience? Anybody has questions, comments, concerns? All right, so I will give the mic back to you, Brian, and your team for any final closing thoughts, if there's one thing that folks should remember about the ASAP program.
No, my thought process has been so successful with the fixed wing folks. And by the way, Part 91 has outgrown the Part 135 as far as the participants of those 200 plus customers that we have. So Just a little side note, the airlines have been using ACSF for 25 years with huge success. And I say that because this is very measurable, it's very quantifiable, and you'll discover information that would have never, ever been potentially disclosed without those protections and an immunity from the FAA. So it's an incredible, valuable tool that you guys should take some serious consideration to kind of explore. So.
All right. Thanks a lot, Brian and your team. Appreciate it. And so glad to be working with you. Again, if you need to talk ASAP, over in the Rotor Safety Zone, look for the Air Charter Safety Foundation.
Thank you, Chris.